And yes, indeed, many very special people in this room, and I had the honor to get to know our panelists personally over the last couple of days. And today we really want to see how all the inner work we are doing can be expressed and implemented in what we do. And we have leaders here who really have a lot of experience what it means to be out there in systems which are not humane, which are very challenging, and how to still not only survive but thrive and move something. So in our first round we will hear personal stories of all four of them, and in the second round we will try to harvest them a little bit to for all of us to take them home, some learnings. So we'll start with you, Baroness Scotland. Patricia. No, I will start with you.
Well, firstly, I think what some of you may not know about me is I'm one of my parents' 12 only children. Because they said they only had one of each of us. And I'm their 10th only child. I was born in the small, beautiful island, the Commonwealth of Dominica in the Caribbean. And I came to the United Kingdom with my other 9 then brothers and sisters when I was about 3. And at that time, the United Kingdom was a very different place to the place it is today. And the aspirations for me as my parents' 4th daughter and 10th child was the same as my other 7 brothers and 4 sisters, because they believed that every single one of us had a talent given by God, and it was our duty to find that talent, hone it, and use it for other people. But the aspirations of my family were not shared by the community in which I lived. So the grading, I was told, was that it went this way: white male, black male, white female, and black female at the bottom. So that the likelihood of me attaining any of the things that I aspired and my parents aspired for me was very small. But that was not the environment in which I was born. My parents believed that everything was possible, but the most important thing was it was possible by the grace of God. And that if you worked hard, and if you believed, and if this was not about you, but about what you could give to the world, then there was nothing you couldn't do. And so that determination and the support I got from my family enabled me to believe. And many of you will know that as a result, as you've just heard, I ended up doing a number of firsts. I got my degree in law at the age of 20. I became a barrister at the age of 21. I became the youngest, and other than Pitt the Younger, who cheated because he became PM at 23, the youngest Queen's Counsel and the first black woman to become Queen's Counsel. I then became the first Master of Middle Temple, the first Deputy High Court Judge, the first, amongst 2 women actually, to go to the House of Lords, and then the first to become a minister, the first to be a female Deputy Lord Chancellor, Deputy Home Secretary, and then the first woman since 1315 to be Her Majesty's Attorney General for England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Everything, and then now the first woman to become the 6th Secretary General of the Commonwealth in 2016, a job I've just left. Everything, I was told, was impossible, and that none of that which I have achieved was achievable. Now, none of that was done on my own. And what I discovered is that we can do almost anything if we do it in collaboration with others. And that I have learnt that if you really know your subject extremely well and you become a real expert in it, you then understand you know nothing at all. And that we really need each other, because all we understand is a tiny part of the reality. It's like a drop in the ocean, but you don't own or control the whole ocean. And if you want a movement, it'll take all of you to move it. And so I learnt particularly as a minister, having constantly been told that everything I wanted to do was impossible. And I was really pleased to hear the president yesterday say that she was crazy. Because I have to tell you, I've been called crazy since I was 6. And so if any time they tell me I'm not crazy, I get very worried. Because you don't change anything unless you are prepared to be a disruptor. And you also have to have courage that if you have analysed it correctly, you've done your needs-based assessment, you've done your audit, you've done your gap analysis, and the empirical data shows you that this is what should be done, you then need something else. You need to think about the individuals for whom you're doing it, and then you have to add your heart. And I found that the essential quality you need to add when you're trying to change things is you have to love the people that you are working for. You have to see them, and you have to hear them. And lots of people think that hearing someone is just listening to the words. It's not. You have to hear the words and look underneath it and try to understand the meaning. Because quite often people don't say what they mean in the words, but they tell you what they mean by the way in which they communicate it. And sometimes by what they do not say. So you'll be in a room and everyone will be talking, and then you'll notice that someone is absolutely silent. And their silence will communicate, and quite often it communicates there's something wrong, or there's an anxiety, or there's a disagreement, but they don't want to voice it. And so what I discovered is that when I was doing policy, you had to listen to everyone. I'll just give you one example of something that they said I was crazy. When I became the deputy to the Home Secretary, I was told by Tony Blair that I only had 2 things that he wanted me to do as Criminal Justice Minister. One was to reduce crime, and 2 was to eradicate domestic violence, which, as many of you all know, affects 1 in 4 women in the world. So I asked him what he wanted me to do in the afternoon. So, when we came to domestic violence, I wanted to know, what was it? Who suffered it? And what I discovered is it wasn't just 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men, but it was a really dreadful scourge for our children. Those children who are subjected to domestic violence fail to meet their developmental milestones, they fail to reach their educational milestones, and they have every indices of dysfunction that you could imagine. And I was also told, and you'll always be told this, and normally if you're female, I have to tell you, gentlemen, they speak to you very slowly, because you're not very bright. So they'll say, Minister, you have no money. To which I usually said, and your point is? Because I always asked a different question, which is what I asked on this. Not how much money don't we have, but how much money are we spending now? And how are we spending it? And who is spending it? And so I identified in 2003 we were spending 23 billion on domestic violence. And the question was, how could we spend less? And who was spending it? So we looked at how much the government was spending, the local government was spending, how much business was spending, the third sector was spending, and how could we cut it? And we created an interministerial meeting, but we had to work with everyone, business, charities, all of us. And we met every month, and we had a program, and we reduced domestic violence by 2010 when we left government. And I'm so glad that Andrew Stone is here, because by the time we left government, we'd reduced domestic violence by 64%. And we'd save 7.1 billion every year. How do we do that? By working together, by collaborating, by leaving no one behind, and by working in a way that was collaborative and focused and loving.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hear the love for the people you want to support is one of the most powerful drivers in you. And turning what people say around, even in a question. Thank you very much. Youssef, you have had the experience of how it is to serve in a system, embodying the system, doing everything what the system of the UN in your case wanted you to do. But there is a feeling inside that somehow this doesn't connect with what is needed, and not knowing what it is, what is needed. Would you like to share your story? And take the mic, please. Yeah.
Sawubona, that's the Zulu word for good morning, which means I see you. I didn't have too many children in my family. We only had 10. And unlike you, I had the unchosen pleasure to be number one. Which means I was in the business of telling, not listening, because I am the oldest of 10. And I was listening with the intent to solve or help, not with the intent to understand. Fast forward. Much what I have been involved in professionally was by accident rather than design. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. One of the defining moments, there are two defining moments in my journey. And what I want to share with you is my unlearning journey. Because as you know, for each behavior, there is an ancestor called a thought or a system of belief. And there is no way on earth, as you have heard, to make a difference outwardly without an inner journey or inner awakening. So there are two defining moments, I was saying, in my unlearning journey. One is a conversation that I was able to participate in about 8 or 9 years ago about epistemic freedom, which is how do we let go of uncertainties, and certainly how to let go of assumptions and certainties that have been defined by others but dictate your conduct. And what it would look like to use a language not your own to imagine your own future, be it English, French, or whatever you've been educated through. The second moment that made me realize that I need to undertake that unlearning journey was when I was asked to write this book, which I entitled, Whose Peace Are We Building? Because most of my career was in the area of peace and security at the UN. And that book is essentially a series of reflections on some of the errors that I perfected in good faith, trying to build peace with very little to show for it. And that pushed me even deeper into more questions and less answers. And then someone helped me by quoting Alvin Toffler's famous, I'm sure you've heard of his future shock. And he said, to be illiterate in the 21st century is not to know how to read and write. To be illiterate is not to know how to unlearn, learn, and relearn. And so there is no way for any one of us, certainly not for me, to make a difference if I have not questioned the powerful assumptions that have informed my understanding and behavior of whatever field I was involved in. I was always trained to be a problem solver. And I was constantly distracted that the problem actually lies within. But I was a leader, which we, in the UN, we confuse with leadership, because we think leadership is about the leader. That's another story. And as a result, we lose the ship being busy with being leader. But despite all of that and wisdom, I was not really ready sort of to decenter myself and question all the certitudes that have been ingrained in me. I certainly was not ready, as someone invited me to do, which is draw on the strength of my ignorance. I said, how could I? I'm an expert. I am former this. I had all these titles. I'm supposed to know. So unknowing was not part of my vocabulary. I had the answers. Even when I was trying to assume a responsibility I didn't choose, which is being an oldest of 10. I am supposed to know. So this idea of developing a beginner's mind, as I'm sure you've heard of the, and being comfortable with asking questions, not providing answer, was not part of my DNA. So I'll just give you an example about after that journey. For many, many years, I had no idea what my purpose in. I had no idea. I was busy doing, not being, let alone thinking about becoming. And after a series of workshops and conversations and mentoring, someone told me, have you ever thought of being a good future ancestor? I thought, what a contradiction, ancestor, future, let alone good. I was truly lost, because he read my book and we had several conversations, and he says, this is one way for you to show up in this world in transition. And he said, but you have to be ready to change seconds into centuries. Again, I didn't know what he was talking about. And then he said, you have to forego this linearity that there is a past, there is a present, and there is a future. That's something you have to say goodbye to. So speaking of courage and compassion, which were in short supply at that time, I didn't know how to do that. So he coached me. So one of the things that he asked me is that in order to unlearn, start with the future and walk back. Don't start with the present. Present forward thinking is going to trigger the instinct of problem solving. We call it climate change. It's climate that changes. It's the problem of climate. So how can we find solutions? So I was caught in that imagery of solutionism that basically provided an extension of the expiration date of the economic system that created that particular, quote, challenge. Because we constantly considered nature as outside us. It's called the environment. It's something that surrounds us. So I had to start with the future and walk back and imagine what would that future would look like. And then bring it to the present and look for regenerative seeds in the present that could be harnessed to bring that future closer. And it would be difficult for the dominant hegemonic system to capture you because you started from the future. They are busy surviving. And he said, through that particular, and I've been practicing it, still practicing, believe me, I'm the beginning of the journey, you can easily hold a mirror to a system under stress so it could see its cracks through that future vision. And it is through cracks that possible futures can be imagined. And he sang for me, he's a wonderful person, a beautiful voice, of Leonard Cohen song, as I'm sure many of you know. There is a crack in everything, and it's through the cracks that the possible is visible. So in other words, we're now going to transform quote, the world or governance or whatever system unless we transform ourselves. My experience is I had to unlearn what I have mastered. Can you imagine? And say, I don't know. Particularly when you are invited as an expert. It's another story. So that's my unlearning in order to relearn, is make a space in your mental cupboard for new things to feel welcomed in your closet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Youssef. Just this experience of feeling inadequate, I think, is something which we all know and not, and the courage it takes to connect to that feeling and just stay with it, not knowing what is it actually, what is kind of not adequate anymore in this time where I'm just doing what everyone else is doing. So thank you very much. Katrin, sorry, thank you for taking the time to be here. And in our conversation and what I know from you, you had the courage to take a responsible position in a young age. And I would like to know from you how it is to be in this system and suddenly being exposed to not only appreciation, but actually very hard criticism as well, where one is in a situation where maybe you need support, you need collaboration, you need thinking partners. But unfortunately, our culture is such, as we have reflected over the last couple of days, that we very much know very well what is not right and to find the person who is responsible for it. So, can you share your story?
Thank you, Carolin. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for being here. I'm the youngest of four, which means that I am the person that smiles and makes everybody happy. And I can see that because I have 3 sons, and the youngest makes everybody happy. So let's say that I began there. In this room, there are several people who have been kind of catalysts in my life. One of them is here, because she actually dragged me into politics. I was studying Icelandic literature, which is maybe not what is considered best in politics. In politics, you should be an economist or a lawyer. Definitely not a person who likes to read poetry, think about the Icelandic sagas, or crime fiction. So let's say that my story is really about entering the realm of politics, but also exiting that realm. And my experience that it's easier to enter than to exit. And I'm still actually in the learning process of making the exit, of making that change. I started in politics at the university. I became a member of the city council in Reykjavik. I became member of parliament. There was an economic crisis in Iceland. I became the Minister of Education, Culture and Research just after that, which was terrible, because these are this field is what I'm truly passionate about, because I truly believe that these things are so important for each society, but we were at really the verge of bankruptcy as a society. So I remember then a person I know very closely said, I said, what am I going to do? I'm just going to cut the budget. It's going to be terrible. And he said, well, at least you can listen to people and show that you care, even though the circumstances are dire. And I think I learned a lot through that. Then I became one of the leaders of the opposition, which was an odd role because it's expected of you to be against everything. If the phone rings, you simply say, I'm against it, without even knowing what you are talking about. I wasn't really good at it. But then circumstances changed, and I became the Prime Minister in 2017 and stayed in that office until 24. And I want to maybe mention 3 things about politics. Politics is a framework that was designed by men and very masculine values. So you should never show weakness. You should always stay strong. And you should talk about certain issues and not other issues. So when I began talking about well-being, and when I began talking about happiness, which of course is maybe one of the most important things that any politician can think about, I experienced tough criticism, because you should talk about, and only talk about, GDP, interest rates, inflation rates, and state budgets. And of course, all of those things are very important. Of course. But they are not the only thing that matters. I was very inspired by the environmental movement. I was very inspired by a poet called Andri Snær Magnason, who once said famously, if you have sex with your wife, it doesn't show in the GDP, but if you visit a prostitute, it shows. Which is better? So this was one of the things that actually shaped me, that we should really think about politics and society from a broader point of view. And during my time as Prime Minister, I managed to start the process on the well-being economy. I know some of you were at the Well-being Forum. And I really enjoyed that project, creating new set of indicators, trying to reframe the budget work, so we actually think about, just as you were saying, it's not about spending more money, but spending it differently, and thinking about how do we really increase the well-being of the people with what we are doing. Now, when I have left politics, I really don't know where this project will head. And that's the difficult part in being in politics. You stay there for some time. You try to implement changes, but one of the things you think about when you exit, is that change durable? Or does it simply change back when you leave? And that really connects to what so many of you have been saying. Is the only change that is really durable the change you can do within yourself? But at the same time, you want to change society for the greater good. So this is a politician's dilemma. Number two, another catalyst in my life, Stefania, which is here, decided to introduce me to meditation. And she said, look at your thoughts as a river that's flowing. You know, leave your mind and look at your mind. And this was quite a revelation to me, because I really connected it to the fact that if you're a politician, you're always kind of watching this river with endless thoughts, endless things to be solved. And you just are in the middle of that river trying to solve everything, but also staying on message, trying to do what you're really passionate about. And during my time as Prime Minister, of course, we had a pandemic. We had 7 volcanic eruptions. We had to evacuate the whole town. We were dealing with the economic consequences of this. And you are truly in the river, trying to catch all the things that are passing, trying to deal with them, tackle them, of course, sometimes succeeding, sometimes not. But it was quite a revelation when I learned in baby steps to step out of that mind and watch it, and feel that you need to have that inner tranquility to be able to tackle the really important issues. Now, my final point is really the journey, because as I told you, it's not that difficult to enter politics. You enter politics, you have a passion about society, you want to do good. Then you go inside and enter the framework, you try to change it, you try to change the system from within. And then you have to make the decision whether you want to stay there forever or whether you want to do things differently. And that is truly difficult, because you still are a human being. And sometimes we forget that politicians are also human beings. And maybe we should practice in watching them and thinking about, is this only a politician or is it only also a human being? Because when you exit politics after having been in that river, trying to do the best you can, you have to kind of go back and think, where is that human being I am? Nobody's calling you anymore. A shock. Nobody's calling you. And you have to truly look within and say, okay, here I am, still a human being, the same human being that I've always been, but also a human being that has grown, changed, learned, and in a very serious need of learning things again. So I truly connect to that journey of unlearning and relearning, because when you've been in the flow for 20 years, like I was, it's a very big step to exit the flow, watch it, and feel really within where you're heading. So I guess this is my story in very few words.
Thank you so much for actually showing vulnerability. I would like to invite you, Thomas, now. And I'm really happy that you're part of this panel, because I know you listen with different ears to this, or with additional ears. When it comes to transforming systems, I just would like to invite you to share your thoughts on what you have heard so far.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for your very inspiring sharing. I'm very honored to sit in this panel. And yeah, these stories I think are very important. Stories shape and uphold systems. We also protect them from seeing other things. And we often say that our culture, our societies, our systems are built on these stories and on general narrative that is common to the whole society. And they offer often a way of making sense of the world. So in that way, they shape and also limit the way we think, the way we are, the way we relate, and the way we act. There are, systems of belief that Youssef was referring to. They are the implicit assumptions we are all sharing and we are blind to. And it's when we are talking about the change that I think we in this place we want to see, we often refer to the change of story from the story of separation that characterize our modern culture to the story of interbeing. And these general narratives, they provide answer to very general questions about who we are, how life works, and what is possible, and what is desirable, and what thriving means. So, in the stories of separation, we have been told we are, or we should be, selfish, individualistic, competitive. That's how we tend to see human beings, and separate from the natural world, and separate from the universe somehow, which is just dead matter without meaning. And in the story, and this is based, as it was said yesterday by Jude, on old scientific view, mainly from the 19th century, mechanistic, etc. And we have this new story coming up, the story of interbeing. And it's based also on new views that are coming up in science, and which emphasize that our very sense of identity is really shaped by our relationships. And that's also the way we flourish in relationships. And we are so interconnected that we can only thrive together as one Earth family. And actually, as Patricia said, that really thriving is about offering our talents for the greater good. It's not about accumulating for ourselves. And it's clear that it's not the way to happiness. So these personal stories are very important because they really shed the light on, what's not working in our world, what's not working in our ways of understanding the world. And to show that, each of us are part of the systems that we want to change. And if our minds are stuck in the old narrative, then we are sustaining that narrative and the systems that rely on it. So the first step is really unlearning, right? Is to be responsible for the way we participate in the world, in this system, even in our collective consciousness, I would say. And that is painful, right? Because not knowing is difficult. It's asking for us to accept to be uncomfortable, right? And we are in this space between stories. We have an old story that is crumbling, that has no future, but it's difficult to, don't want to die. And we have this new story that wants to be born, right? But we are in this space in the middle. And so we are called to be somehow pioneer, to bridge, to that new story. And often the change comes from the margins of the system, right? We have our Patricia is coming from a different culture, but was also holding a very powerful story from her own family, right? Who makes it for her possible what was deemed impossible in this old story. Katrin was coming from also not the mainstream masculine political culture, right? And yeah, they emphasize also that in this new story of interbeing, the importance of collaboration, as Patricia said, right? We have, the world has become so complex that we are only all a tiny piece of the solutions, and we have to come together. We have to come together with that sense of interbeing, that we need really to rely on each other, and we have to come together with love. So I think, just we are here in Iceland, and maybe like to invite ourselves to create together a new story, I would say a new saga for the world, which probably to me will put, most importantly, well-being and what was said, like on this quote from Martin Luther King that was mentioned, I found beautiful, no? Move from our attention to out of the things, centered on things, but rather centered on person. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, for your thoughts. I feel like we are in a shared experiment called world transformation. We are trying to understand what is happening in us, around us, whilst we are in an experiment. Yes, very, very auspicious in a way. We have some more time now, about half an hour, where we can elaborate a little bit on the things which have been shared, but I don't know how you feel. I would like to just go on for the rest of the day, going into each of these aspects, because I know there is so much more to share. And there is also the opportunity for someone of you who likes to comment on something or ask another question. Ask a question. I would like to start with one aspect which touched me, which you mentioned, Youssef, which is connected to compassion with the dying system. Can you say something about this sensitivity which we all need in this process, which is so fragile?
As part of my learning and unlearning, I'm a linguist by training. I have nothing to do with peace and security until late in my career. And therefore, I was taught to question the assumptions informing all the words in this foreign language called English. One of them is compassion. So if you look at the etymological meaning of compassion, which is basically being one with the one who is suffering. That's the Latin passion. You know, you've heard of passionare and all that. That is not the meaning of compassion in most languages. You don't wake up and be compassionate with others when they are in trouble. Being compassionate is one way of being all the time, particularly with yourself. Now, as Thomas mentioned, we are in between spaces. These are called, as friends who know me, like Jude and others, called liminal spaces. It comes from Latin limens, which means a threshold. A threshold between something that is under stress and maybe collapsing, and something that is not yet ready to begin. And you asked your question, how am I going to show up? What is the best version of myself that I need to develop and exercise in order to help facilitate that transition between what is and what if? From the leadership perspective, by the way, it's called, and there is always a name for everything, it's called liminal leadership. You can look it up. It has a whole. So in that role of being a facilitator of the transition between what is and what could be, you have to be compassionate with the system that is becoming violent as the end nears. There is a saying from I was reminded by my Indian mentor. And she says, when a system or when a hegemony nears the end, the worst rises to the top. Does that ring a bell? I won't mention where that top is, where it is taking place. And that system is really in trauma, because it can no longer rely on the same hegemonic monomyths, whether economic, political, etc., to stay in power. And it's a needs of healing. Otherwise, you end up by having two problems. One is othering that system and criticizing it, and particularly you can imagine as an African, all my woes I will attribute, and I'll be clapping. Finally they are collapsing. But it's not going to be without damage to everyone. And the other one is to really show compassion. And in your book, and you'll talk about compassion versus empathy versus sympathy. I invite you to read. What are you going to do about it? And that's where you have to understand that that particular system is on trauma and is in need of healing. And unless you understand and show compassion to a system that you do not like, and I'm using charitably a word called like. Heaven knows you can think of other words. But you need to show compassion to a system that is introverted, constantly othering others, using fear to sustain its existence, and may even use violence. And you have to go beyond those systems and understand why a system that is nearing an end is showing those symptoms of collapse. So compassion is important if you want to exercise the liminal leadership from something that is coming to an end to something that is, otherwise you will not be a bridge walker. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Youssef. you used the word threshold and this in-between space. And this reminds me on something which you, Patricia, said, to listen to what, no, to see what you see but others don't see, and even to listen to what is not being heard. Can you say how you do this? And the microphone.
Well, I think one of the things I found is really important is to be inclusive. And what Youssef just said is really important, because one of the things I've had to do often is to go into an organization which is failing and then change it and heal it. And so the most important thing I found is that most systems, particularly when they're failing, have those aspects which need to be preserved and those aspects which need to be changed. And quite often, when you go into the system, if you are not, as Youssef would say, compassionate, you want to trash it all. And that doesn't work. Because every time that happens, you cure some ills, but actually you create quite often many more. So what I found was absolutely essential was to talk to all the people who were operating the system as it is, and to understand what they thought was good, what they thought was bad, what they wanted to treasure and hold on to, and then understand why. Because it's like dealing with someone who is terribly obese, and they are getting more and more disabled because they can't move. And you have to try and help them to recast their body and to use the limbs in a way that is better. So you're going to have to take away some of the fat, but you mustn't break any of the bones. So I have found that in that inclusive process of engaging everyone and doing the workshops as to how they're going to do change, you have to listen to them. And you have to listen for the fear that they may have. You have to listen to the hopes that may have. And so I very much empathize with what's just been said. I'll tell you what we have done. I tend to say to people, let's just think, what does success look like? Because if we can't envisage success, we can never get there. So you're saying, okay, where would we like to be in 5 years' time? And if we'd like to do the following, how are we going to take the steps to get there? So I used to send my teams crazy, because I'd say you need the needs-based assessment, so what do we need? Then what do we have? Not just what I have, but what does everybody have? Then what is the gap between what we need and what we have? And who is going to help us to fill that gap? Because one of the things I think is really important is to understand it's not all about us individually, it's about us collectively. And so once you've done that, you then have your roadmap, and you can say, okay, so that's what success looks like. That's where we're going to be in 5 years' time. So what does that mean we have to do today? 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. And for me, when I'm planning, because I thought I was very laid back, and apparently I'm not. I always want to have everything done 6 months before, because then you've got 6 months to tighten. And so you also find you tend to under-promise, then over-deliver. But you have to really listen to people. And you have to accept that most people want to do a good job. And they feel hurt when they're failing. And they're angry when you are telling them to do something that they feel they cannot do. So I think that's where the listening comes in. And what other thing I learned was that quite often you see things. I remember one, I'll never forget this. I was reshaping a system which was failing badly. And I came in and I saw very clearly the steps we had to take. And I remember saying to my permanent secretary that I thought, but this is easy. And then she took a big breath and she said, Minister, it's easy for you. And she explained to me that when I told people everything, they got frightened because they couldn't see it. So what we had to do is listen, plan, and then tell them bit by bit. And only when they'd done 95%, you say, I want you to do this bit, and this is where we're going, that's what they're going to do. And we can't do that. And we go, you've already done it. And you've only just got to do this bit. And I think that's about loving people, understanding them, honouring them, and listening when they say they don't want to do it. Quite often they're angry. That's not always anger, it's fear. It's fear. And they, and I saw that on Constitution, if you are really operating a bad system, you get lots of complaints, and you get lots of abuse, and people withdraw, and they get vulnerable, and then they don't listen and they fight back. So you have to understand them to create a system which will enable them to give of their best. And if you believe that people have something special and wonderful about them, you look for it and you identify what it is, and you don't expect them all to be the same, because we're not the same. We all have a slightly different skill. So we have to work to our skills and just draw them out. And I found that is very important. And I've seen people who are very bright, really amazing, and they just have no heart. And if you have no heart, it won't work. And so I remember having to say to a really fantastic civil servant that he was brilliant. But I said, if you really want to succeed with your team, you're going to have to love them.
That's a beautiful closure. Can we have 20 seconds of silence as this thought? I would like to use the last minutes to give a final word to Thomas and Katrin. And then we will have time to talk about in groups about this, about what we have heard, and this will be explained later. Thomas, you want to share about something?
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to build on what Patricia has just shared about the need to honor what is good in the old system. We have developed an initiative dedicated to the role, the inner dimension of transformation in food systems. And that's an initiative located in the United Nations Development Program. So it's quite a pioneering initiative to make the case for that within a UN organization. And we are getting traction. We have 500 members, more than 4,000 supporters, and we are being recognized as having a very important part of the solution. And 2 years ago, when after we just launched publicly that initiative, we come together, I think 40 of us, right? And we did a systemic constellation to represent the system and ask what's our role into it. And I think the main insight we got, or I personally got, was about this, was about people from the old systems wanting to be recognized, honored, and included. Because, yeah, and I think it's important to see the historic dimension, that what was at some point the solutions people believe in and put their heart into it, now often has become the problem. And that's something a bit difficult to experience and accept, acknowledge. And we have realized that with this agenda around consciousness, around human values, around more human ways of working and coming together, that this is a very positive agenda, that actually people want to be part of it naturally, and we should make sure we are not excluding them, and rather through this trying to heal the separation and the potential polarization that we see in these systems that often impede us to move forward. Thank you.
For those who don't have the book or haven't seen it, from Thomas' Politics of Being, you're most welcome to have a look at it. Can you hold it? Katrin, your final words.
Well, I was really inspired by what you said about this system that we're living in, because we have been running a system of unsustainable economy for a very long time. And that is not only having an effect on our planet, but the effects on our planet, the climate crisis and other environmental changes, are also having effect on humans, on health, but also on human rights and values in our society. And in my opinion, for the last few years, I think after we had seen a lot of progress made in gender equality, well-being, etc., we are seeing a backlash. And that is maybe the system that is kind of flexing its muscle now, where we see huge economic interests behind the conflicts in the world, and more human values, spirituality being put really out on the side. And this is one of the things that you see. Spirituality is something that you really shouldn't talk about when you're talking about reality. But what is reality without spirituality? And I think this is also part because success was mentioned very powerfully by Patricia. I think, sadly, that a lot of people measure success purely by economic values, and not just by being a whole human being, which has no need to enter conflicts, which is not only measured by economic values, but also by societal and human values and environmental values. So I think everybody who is ready to kind of enter this has a very important role to play, because we are kind of reaching a tipping point, not only for our planet, but also for these values. And everybody can do something. This is something that I've also learned, not only by being in places of power, but also by simply being, and being different from that old system.